let's dive into first. We're gonna start talking about like what's normal, and when I say normal, I mean the non-disease state. What's happening in the body when you do not have diabetes, right? Because although diabetes is technically an abnormality, I don't want it to sound like they're strange or different. It's just one thing doesn't work, or a few things don't work like a person without diabetes.
Right.
So the body runs off of nutrients, right? The three main nutrient sources: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Carbohydrates are the energy are used for energy in the body, and glucose specifically is the main energy source in the brain. I think you did know that, right?
Glucose being the main source of energy for the brain.
Right.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, I know you very vividly remember our experience with the physics of medical imaging course. Yeah.
Right. So the here's the thing: glucose is the main energy molecule throughout the entire body. However, typically what happens in the cells is glucose gets broken down, and it's the byproducts of breaking it down through glycolysis then go on and get fed into another system that produces even more energy. The brain doesn't feed it into that second system. It just uses glycolysis, which is the breaking down of glucose and getting energy from glucose. So that's the key difference between the brain and the rest of the body. So when we ingest food, it gets broken down into the nutrients like I had described above, right? And these molecules get absorbed into the bloodstream and it gets transported all over the body. Carbohydrates specifically get broken down into the simplest carbohydrate, which is glucose, and the glucose is what is getting absorbed by the bloodstream. These larger, other more complex carbohydrates are not getting broken down, or sorry, not getting absorbed into the bloodstream. So when glucose reaches the cells, some of it moves into the cells through what we call passive transport. Uh, but some cells actually have exceptions to this. The cells that do not absorb glucose passively require an active transport mechanism, which means it requires energy or it requires something else in order to get the glucose in. That other thing that's required to get the glucose in is insulin. And for those cells that are different and don't absorb the glucose passively, those cells require insulin, and you can think of insulin as the key to the lock on those cells. Once glucose is in the cell, it gets metabolized or undergoes a bunch of chemical reactions to generate a molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and that is the energy molecule in living organisms. The cells that typically need that insulin are your muscle cells and your liver cells. So those require insulin. A lot of people don't realize the liver is extremely important, and one of the things that the liver does is produce energy for the body through metabolism, and it's a huge source of metabolism. Um, so in diabetes, in people with diabetes, uh, in the simplest terms, because diabetes is really complex and there's a lot that goes into it, but the most simplest form is there's some abnormality with insulin. There are two primary types of diabetes: type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is typically onset in children prior to or around adolescence, and type 1 occurs when the body fails to produce insulin, or the insulin that it does produce is abnormal and it doesn't work. Type 2 diabetes is typically onset in adulthood, and it's when insulin becomes less effective. They build a tolerance to the insulin, like your body builds up a tolerance to the insulin, so it doesn't work as well. In severe type 2 diabetes, insulin may no longer be produced or it may not work at all. And at that point, the type 2 diabetic stops producing insulin. They become classified as what we call insulin dependent. which means they need an external source of insulin in order to get glucose into the cells.